Good evening and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. Here's what's coming up. Multiple tornadoes now impacting the west coast of Florida. That's ahead of incoming Hurricane Milton. Jack Bradley is at the White House with the latest on the federal response. And Vice President Kamala Harris warning people in the path of Hurricane Milton to take this storm seriously. This as former President Trump criticizes the administration's hurricane response while announcing an upcoming rally in New York City. And Senate Democrats are spending big on the Montana Senate race, why the state is critical this year, and what polling is saying in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and other key toss-up states for the Senate.
This is Capitol Report, live from our global headquarters in our nation's capital. Here's Steve Lance.
Historic, catastrophic, and different from any other hurricane. These are what federal officials are calling Hurricane Milton before making landfall in Florida. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley joins us now from the White House. Good evening to you, Jack. So tell us, what is the latest on the federal response to this hurricane?
Good evening, Steve. Well, we're seeing that they're calling it catastrophic. They're putting an unprecedented number of resources down there. We've seen that it hasn't made landfall yet, which is expected around 9 p.m. tonight. The eye of the hurricane likely to pass through Florida around midnight hours, early into the morning. But President Biden moments ago said that this hurricane could be the worst to hit Florida in over a century. Take a look at him just moments ago.
We've already approved emergency declarations for Florida. We have thousands of federal personnel on the ground, and we've staged and are ready to go. We have 20 million meals, 40 million liters of water.
FEMA has already issued $344 million in direct assistance to individuals experiencing the Hurricane Helene aftermath. Now, over 8,000 federal personnel are deployed, and still they're stretched thin. 1,200 search and rescue personnel are already in Florida pre-landfall. Now, Milton will enter the west coast from Florida near Tampa, pass over Orlando, and then leave the east coast as a hurricane. It's not going to downgrade as a tropical storm, which is definitely strange in this case, as they usually downgrade to tropical storms when they hit land at some point. Over 20 million people across the state are currently under a hurricane alert. Steve?
Jack, so it looks like there's obviously very little time left to prepare. First we had Helene, now Milton. What are officials saying about how devastating this storm might be?
They're saying it'll be catastrophic. We've already seen over a dozen tornadoes hit the west coast of Florida, and there could be more tornadoes and storm surge. Here's President Biden on this earlier, Steve.
Milton still carries incredible destructiveness, can wipe out communities, can cause loss of life. Storm surge is still expected to be up to 13 feet. So I urge everyone in Hurricane Milton's path to listen to local officials and follow all the safety instructions they give. At this point, evacuation is probably difficult.
Milton moved from a Category 5 down to a Category 3. But officials are saying don't think of this as a downgrade, as it just implies wind speed. The impacts of the storm could likely still be catastrophic, causing the same amount of damage as it would have before. Now, taking the lead on this are state officials, as the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, is providing a helping hand there, though they are stretched thin as they're still responding to the aftermath of Hurricane Helene. Now, this comes after President Biden rearranged his trips both to Angola and to Germany, which he was supposed to leave later this week. He rescheduled them ahead of that trip, and he's overseeing the response efforts to the hurricane right here from the White House. Now, Biden urged those near the storm to listen to local officials for any updated responses. Steve?
And today's Jack Bradley live from the White House. We'll be checking in with you as this continues to play out. Thank you, Jack. And Vice President Kamala Harris joining President Biden for updates on Hurricane Milton. She also released a statement warning against price gouging during the emergency. Here's NTD's Jason Blair.
Less than 14
President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris received a briefing on Hurricanes Helene and Milton on Wednesday. Harris joined the meeting virtually from New York.
And in the hours and days ahead, President Biden and I and our administration will continue to do everything we can to protect the people who have been in the path of this storm. And once the storm has passed, we will be there to help folks recover and rebuild.
One of the big messages was reminding people that even though Milton was downgraded to a Category 4, it is still dangerous. Biden and Harris encouraged people to listen to local officials' warnings and get to a safe location.
Already, we have sent more than 1,000 federal personnel to be on the ground in Florida to assist with what needs to happen in the state to prepare for this hurricane, and we will continue to scale up those efforts.
The Vice President's office also released a statement warning against price gouging during the hurricanes. It says any company or individual that tries to exploit Americans in an emergency should know that the administration is monitoring for allegations of fraud and price gouging and will hold those taking advantage of the situation accountable. And with the election 27 days away, Harris continued her media blitz this week. She appeared on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert and The Howard Stern Show on Tuesday. Earlier in the week, she was on Call Her Daddy, The View, and 60 Minutes.
And NTD's Jason Blair joins us now in studio. Jason, great reporting there. And, you know, obviously Kamala Harris giving Vice President Harris the 60 Minutes interview that's still getting a lot of attention. But the Trump campaign is actually taking issue with it. Talk to us about this.
Yeah, that's right, Steve. So the Trump campaign released a statement basically demanding the full unedited transcript from the 60-minute interview. They allege that the interview was edited quite a bit. They sent a link to an example of Harris responding to one of the questions, giving quite a lengthy answer. And then underneath that was basically the same version of the question, and then Harris giving a different answer, very much shorter. So this is what they're alleging. They're alleging they edited it quite a bit. And Trump was also talking about this on Truth Social, alleging again that they were trying to make her look, quote, more presidential.
NTD's Jason Blair, appreciate the reporting. And Democrats face a tough battle to keep control of the Senate. Here's NTD's Melina Wisecup with the latest polling in some key toss-up states.
Today, we're going to talk about why Democrats have to work very hard to be able to hold on to their slim majority in the Senate and why it's almost certain that Republicans will be able to flip the Senate. So just by the sheer numbers alone, it reflects this. We have 34 seats that are up for grabs, 23 of which are held by Democrats. Some like to say this is 22. They're not taking into account Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia. He actually recently flipped his party affiliation from Democrat to Independent. He still caucuses with the Democrats. As for Republicans, they only have 11 seats up for grabs. They only need a net gain of 2 seats to be able to win the majority. That dwindles to an even lower amount if J.D. Vance becomes the vice president and we have a 50-50 split in the Senate like we have right now, J.D. Vance being the tie-breaking vote. Now, as for where Democrats stand on some of these key races, well, like I mentioned, West Virginia is already to be considered to be a Republican seat. Democrats just gave up here. They're just not even trying with West Virginia. As for Montana, this is probably the top priority for Democrats. They're funding this race unimaginably right now, but it's also been consistently leaning in Republicans' favor. Consistent poll right now. So Montana, look at the poll right here. This is wider than most of the toss-up races, why it's leaning Republican. It's still in single digits, though, but one thing I do want to point out why this is a flip-flop state, mainly the presidential race. Trump won by a large margin here. We're talking around 16% that Trump won by. So you can see the voters in Montana are going to have to either have a split ballot to be able to re-elect John Tester, or he's going to have to change some Republican minds. And he's already trying to do that. He started a Republicans for Tester campaign just a few months ago, trying to change the minds of some of the voters in that state. So that carries us over to our toss-up races. We're starting with Ohio. Now, this is also a race that former President Trump won in 2020. He won this state by sort of a large margin, around 8%. Not terribly big, but it's much bigger than some of the other toss-ups that we're seeing. And remember, this is J.D. Vance's state. So he has name recognition, once again making this a tough down ballot race for Senator Sherrod Brown. Although he is a longtime senator, this is his third term in the Senate, so he also has his own name recognition in some sense. The margin here is not terribly big. It's around 3%, so it could be worse, but it also could be better for Democrats. Moving on to Pennsylvania. The polling here is similar, just around 4%. And then once again with the name recognition. Bob Casey has tons of name recognition. As a matter of fact, he is the longest term Democrat senator from the state of Pennsylvania, so he's carrying that name recognition with him. David McCormick, although he is not necessarily involved in politics so much, he also has his own name recognition in the state. He has ties at the local level. He has ties at the federal level. He actually served under Bush as in the Commerce Department and in the Treasury Department. As for the presidential results, well, this is also important too, because that margin was super tight, won by Biden. A very tight margin here, so this shows that Pennsylvania could really go either way at this point. Moving on to Michigan, both of these candidates are representatives in the House. They both kind of fly under the radar, Alyssa Slotkin and Mike Rogers. They tend to not step out of line with party leadership so as to not upset maybe their more extreme voters on either wing of the party, but also they're trying to make sure they court those independent voters. So this is also an interesting race to watch. Once again, the margin here for the polling isn't terribly big. But so that could be worse for Democrats. But the margin for victory for the presidential race is rather on the small end. It's around 3% that Biden won by. So that's why this race is a toss-up. Moving on to Wisconsin, this is a race that was actually the rating of this race was actually changed by Cook Political Report just yesterday. They moved it from a lean Democrat race to a toss-up race, indicating that the polling for this race is actually tightening up a bit. Let's take a look at that polling now. So the margin here isn't terribly big, but it's still within the single digits. So then the presidential race is really what we have to be thinking about, because once again, this is a down ballot race. Biden won this by just around 1 percentage point back in 2020, making this a super tough race for Tammy Baldwin to win. Now, Tammy Baldwin, she does have name recognition in the state. She's served in the state since 1999, so she does have the trust of Wisconsin voters here. The key here is for her to win the down ballot ticket with former President Trump at the top of the ticket, which is going to be a challenge considering the close margin of victory that Biden had back in 2020. Now, funding actually reflects everything that we just went through as far as where they're putting the money and where they see as priorities. Montana, like we mentioned, is the #1 funded race by Democrats in the Senate. This was their #1 priority, although it's leaning towards Republicans' favor, so not sure how much good that campaign money did, although polling can only indicate so much. Second is Ohio. Third is actually Nevada. But so they put $1.2 million in Nevada. They always like to put a lot of money in Nevada. Third is Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, like I mentioned, is also where the presidential candidates have been campaigning strong. So all of this is really why Democrats are going to have to work their tails off if they want to keep their majority, and why it's almost looking like Republicans are certain to take back the Senate.
Up next, Vice President Kamala Harris making appearances on daytime and late night talk shows, as well as 60 Minutes this week. We'll talk to a Republican strategist about her message and how it's resonating with voters. And former President Trump is on the campaign trail while Harris is on TV. We'll talk to a Democratic strategist about how effective their respective campaigns are. That and more when we return. And welcome back to the Capitol Report on NTD Television. Vice President Kamala Harris has made a flurry of appearances on daytime, late-night shows, as well as 60 Minutes. And former President Trump is heading into deep blue territory with his upcoming rally in Southern California. Joining me now to discuss the candidates' strategies is Matt Klink, Republican strategist and owner and president of Klink Campaigns. Matt Klink, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you again for having me.
Of course, Matt. Vice President Kamala Harris has made a flurry of appearances on talk shows from Howard Stern, Stephen Colbert, even The View. I want to play a clip of something she said.
Even the hurricanes that are the one that's about to hit Florida, what has already hit, I think people are exhausted.
Yeah.
And they're exhausted with the lies. They're exhausted with the selfishness. They're exhausted with the attempt to divide us as Americans. And they're ready to turn the page and chart a new way forward.
Matt, what do you think of the vice president's messaging there in contrast with, say, the Trump campaign and their approach to the hurricanes?
Well, Kamala Harris has suddenly found religion when it comes to wanting to talk to the media. You know, I applaud her for doing it. What took her so long to get there? But look, her comments on the hurricane, this is Kamala Harris attempting to be relevant because she has zero role in the hurricanes. And let's face it, the federal government response in Georgia and North Carolina to date has been lacking on the hurricanes. That's not from me. That's from the people that are on the ground. And the contrast that Donald Trump has brought up is that, you know, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, this is their remit. They had $101.01 billion to spend on people who are in this country illegally, and they dropped the ball on providing timely aid to the people in North Carolina and Atlanta. So Kamala Harris can say what she wants to friendly media, but it's not going very far.
Now, Matt, former President Trump's making a rare appearance in Kamala Harris's home state of California, expected to be holding a rally with supporters in Coachella, Southern California. New York Times is also reporting that Trump could be planning a major rally at Madison Square Garden in deep blue New York City. What do you make of Trump's kind of approach here to go into deep blue California and perhaps deep blue New York City?
Well, again, it's the candidates are mostly spending their times in the 7 swing states right now, but it doesn't mean they're spending exclusively their time in those swing states. So going into Coachella, there are a number of hot congressional races in California. I think Trump here is playing the long game, that he realizes that if the Republicans don't hold some of these House seats in California that Republicans have, that he could very easily lose a majority in the House if he were to be elected president. In Madison Square Garden, look, there are a lot of New Yorkers that are pro-Trump, and playing Madison Square Garden or appearing in Madison Square Garden is a great venue. It's just an attempt to keep the base motivated. I mean, this is a base election and a turnout election. There are very, very few persuadables left at this point.
Now, former 6-term Democratic Congressman Peter Deutsch endorsed former President Trump on Monday, citing Trump's immigration policy, school choice, and foreign policy. How significant are these types of endorsement, and how would you say it compares to, say, Harris's touting of the endorsement of former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney?
This happens in every major political campaign. I think that the endorsements are relevant in the areas like Congressman Deutsch or former Congressman Deutsch in Pennsylvania. I think that that's going to help in a swing state. But largely, it just makes a little bit of news, but it doesn't sway voters one way or the other.
Matt, Harris sat down for an interview with CBS 60 Minutes and was asked about her economic plan. I want to get your reaction to what she said.
You mentioned groceries. Part of my plan is what we must do to bring down the price of groceries.
Harris says she'll press Congress to pass a federal ban on price gouging for food and groceries, but details are yet to be defined.
So, Matt, with 27 days left until Election Day, how effective is Harris's economic messaging at this point in the campaign?
The current state of the economy is actually hurting Vice President Harris because, you know, while the economic news last week was better in terms of the number of jobs created, the reality on the ground is that families know that everything costs more under the Biden-Harris administration. And, you know, they've had 3.5 years. They could have launched this price gouging investigation, which it's going to show that they're not. So again, it's hyperbole. She's in a really tough spot here because the economy for average Americans is hurting people. You know, there's the line that, you know, this is Biden-Harrisnomics, where you pay more to live less. Everything costs more since they have been president. And she can say that it's shrinkflation or, you know, or greed by people who produce food. The reality is that the government injected too much money into the marketplace, and it's created massive inflation, and everything costs more under the Biden-Harris administration. So she can say that, but most voters are not going to be convinced by that. I don't even think that the host of 60 Minutes was convinced by that.
Matt Klink, thank you for joining us to share your perspective. And turning to our Democratic strategist for analysis of both the Trump and Harris campaigns and Harris's handling of the hurricanes, I'm joined by Denny Salas, Senior Vice President of Gotham Government Relations. Denny Salas, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you, Denny. I was just speaking with a Republican strategist. He was saying that Vice President Harris's economic messaging isn't necessarily resonating with voters. She's talking about bringing down the price of groceries and consumer goods, but still not being so specific. What is your response to this person's commentary?
So, look, it's a great question. And I believe that the Harris campaign hasn't been as detailed as they should be when it comes to their economic messaging. One, they've been running away from an actual very successful economy that the Biden administration has actually been implementing. We can see it in the job numbers. The one worry and the main concern for a lot of the average Americans really has been the cost of goods when it comes to inflation. So what you have heard Kamala Harris state on several interviews and also been part of her policy platform has been focusing on things like price gouging. Has there been cases where you've had numerous companies kind of work together in order to inflate the cost of goods? I think the answer has been yes. You have seen some lawsuits from the federal government attacking some platforms, especially when it comes to the cost of housing. So they haven't, but I do believe, I think he's right when he's stating that they haven't been great about getting that message across. And we've seen it. We've seen it in the numbers, but in the polls, I should say. But when you actually look at some of the polls data too, you've also seen this closing the gap when it comes to the strength of Trump, when it comes to who is better suited to deal with the economy. So I think there's better opportunity here over the next 30 days or so for the Kamala campaign to actually hammer on the economy, because we all know that that's really going to be the most important thing that voters care about the most. And I always say that no matter what, always harken back to what James Carville always said. It's the economy, stupid. Focus on that messaging. So,
yes, indeed, it is. Yeah. We're actually also seeing, Denny, a big media blitz from the Harris campaign right now on podcasts and talk shows. I want to play a clip we have from her with Stephen Colbert.
So that covers Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's do Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Let's do Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Eagles or Steelers, and no one will be mad. Just choose one of those. I'm sure it'll be fine.
49ers.
I would say that was a good answer when we're talking about the swing state of Pennsylvania. Do you think this new approach is going to reach a different demographic of voters? And how are you seeing the strategy?
First, I'm going to have to say that, I grew up in New England, so I'm definitely a diehard Patriots fan, so they're just better than all those teams. But that being said, going back, look, I think that the Harris campaign made a huge mistake, has been making a huge mistake since the DNC. And what I mean by that is that if you look at the data and you compare it to someone like Barack Obama when he was running for president back in 2008, and how many missed days the vice president has been out on the campaign trail. And what I mean by that is that since the DNC, when Obama was the presidential candidate back in 2008, he only missed 2 days. He only had 2 days off where he wasn't on the campaign trail. That means he wasn't talking to voters, or he was talking to voters. He was doing these interviews. He was out there and actually getting the message across and being able to define himself. The Harris campaign hasn't done that. They've missed more than 50% of the days where she has not been out there talking to voters or having these interviews. So I think we've seen this turn obviously occur right now, turning into October, heading to the election day. But I think they miss a huge opportunity. And I think if you actually saw the trend lines as well for all the battleground state polls, you've seen Trump narrow the gap. because I believe the Trump campaign has been very successful in not only defining Kamala Harris, but also going out there. They have been the Trump campaign has been out working and out hustling the Kamala Harris campaign. So I think this strategy and the switch of strategy is good, but now we actually have to see her out there. And today, for example, right now, Trump is out campaigning, having 2 rallies out in Pennsylvania, and the vice president is not anywhere. Like, she's been on TV. Yeah, so it's important.
No, I think you make a very excellent point. This close to election day, every single day matters, and everything sort of becomes political. So with that said, has the Harris campaign handled recent events like the hurricane well? And what is your advice for them going forward?
Look, I do believe they've handled it very well. I think both the Biden administration and Kamala's messaging and the vice president messaging around this issue has been going pretty well. I think they've delivered. I think FEMA is doing everything they potentially can in order to actually serve the residents that have been greatly affected. Look, full disclosure, I have my in-laws there in the path of the storm because they're based in Tampa, right? So they're right there in Safety Harbor, Florida. So they are, they're there. So I know that when I'm looking at this, even from the personal level, we want the federal government to be there 100% to actually help all these affected residents. I think they've done a good job so far. I think they are looking at any other ways, and they're trying to execute any other strategies to actually help these folks, especially folks that were stranded in Nashville when there's really no other way to get to those folks in the affected areas. So with Hurricane Helene. So I think they've done a good job. The messaging has been good. And also what we have seen as well is that, yes, there's been this exponential rise in misinformation, especially on social media, and these folks believing that the federal government is not actually helping them. I think what they've also been able to do is not only get accurate messaging out there, but to galvanize all Republican mayors and Republican elected officials that represent these affected areas to tell the residents and tell their constituents that, look, this is the actual truth. This is what actually is happening, to actually, dispel a lot of those misinformation that's been going out there. So I think they've done a good job. And, we always look at the October surprise type thing. Could it be these hurricanes that leads to some sort of disaffected voters? We don't know, but hopefully they just continue focusing on doing the job so they can help as many folks as possible for these 2 hurricanes.
Well, Denny, we'll certainly be thinking of your in-laws and everybody else in the path of the storm, all of those Floridians. It's certainly going to be a big test. So, Denny Salas, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Justice considers breaking up Google, why it's accusing the tech giant of illegal conduct. Lawmakers will have to vote on the National Defense Authorization Act during the lame duck session of Congress. What their priorities are when we come back. And welcome back to the Capitol Report. I'm Steve Lance. With just 27 days left before the election, former President Trump vowing to win the key swing state of Pennsylvania. He's also announcing a rally in deep blue New York City. This comes as Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris are aiming at each other over hurricane response. NTD's Iris Tao has more from Trump's rally in Scranton, Pennsylvania.
Here in President Biden's hometown of Scranton, Pennsylvania, former President Trump urges voters here to vote early and also vows to win Pennsylvania, this biggest battleground prize with 19 electoral votes. In appeal to voters here, Trump vows to lower their energy prices by expanding oil drilling and also to cut taxes by eliminating tax on tips, tax on overtime pay, and tax on Social Security.
No tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and no tax on Social Security benefits for our great seniors.
But now, with just 27 days before the election, Trump is notably spending resources and time in states in addition to traditional battleground states. Trump announced at his Scranton rally that he will be campaigning at Madison Square Garden in New York later this month, and his campaign confirmed to our media group that that rally will happen on October 27th, just 9 days before the November election.
We're going to make a play for New York. Hasn't been done in a long time. The migrants have taken over Madison Avenue. They've taken over Fifth Avenue. They've taken over the parks. The kids can't play Little League. You know, it sounds like a trivial thing. It's a big deal when you have a son that's a Little League player and he can't play.
And in addition to New York, Trump's also vowing to, quote, make a play for other blue states like Minnesota, New Jersey, and New Mexico. And this weekend, he's even set to rally in California. Meanwhile, as two hurricanes hit the U.S., both presidential candidates are taking aim at each other over hurricane response. Trump, at his Scranton rally, accused the administration of spending much-needed FEMA money on illegal immigrants.
They had no money. You know where they gave the money? To illegal immigrants coming in.
While Vice President Kamala Harris on Tuesday accused Trump of spreading what she calls misinformation.
It is unconscionable, frankly, that anyone who would consider themselves a leader would mislead desperate people to the point that those desperate people would not receive the aid to which they are entitled.
And next up, Trump is holding another rally in Reading, Pennsylvania tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And that's before he heads to Aurora, Colorado on Friday for a rally in another non-swing state. Reporting from Scranton, Pennsylvania, Iris Tao, NTD News.
Officials are urging millions of Floridians to evacuate in preparation for the life-threatening hurricane. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more about what it's like on the ground.
According to the National Hurricane Center, Milton weakened slightly to a still powerful Category 3 storm Wednesday afternoon. As of late Wednesday, Milton was located 100 miles southwest of Tampa. With sustained winds of 125 miles per hour, the storm is moving northeast at 17 miles per hour. Tropical storm force winds also began lashing the coast. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis gave an update on the storm.
If you are in the path of this storm, you are most likely going to lose power. So just prepare for that.
He noted officials have delivered massive amounts of supplies such as meals, water bottles, sandbags, tarps, and generators to help local communities respond to the storm.
We've also deployed more than 11,000 feet of flood protection systems and erected them around critical infrastructure like hospitals, wastewater treatment facilities, and electric infrastructure.
DeSantis reassured residents that Florida had prepared significant fuel reserves ahead of Hurricane Milton, with supplies strategically staged and ready to be deployed as needed.
We still have on hand 1.6 million gallons of diesel and 1.1 million gallons of gasoline. There is no, right now, fuel shortage. However, demand has been extraordinarily high, and some gas stations have run out. To be able to help ameliorate that, the Florida Highway Patrol has facilitated 106 long-distance fuel tanker escorts with sirens getting through traffic.
The National Hurricane Center urged residents to complete all preparations to protect life and property, including evacuations on Wednesday morning, since conditions would worsen in the afternoon. The mayor of St. Petersburg repeated the message.
This is an extremely dangerous threat to our area, and I urge you to finish all of your preparation efforts as soon as possible. We are expecting between 8 to 12 feet of storm surge and winds up to 100 miles per hour. We anticipate that we will begin to feel the impacts from Milton in the next few hours.
Officials are urging residents to seek safety by heading to their nearest shelter.
If you live in a mobile or manufactured home and you're in this impact area, please go to a local shelter. If you rely on power for medical devices or other things, please go to a local shelter. Your home and belongings can be replaced, but you cannot.
Several evacuees shared their experiences regarding the conditions at the shelters.
I'm in an evacuation center, but there's over 1,000 people here. That's kind of scary.
I'm really happy that we get fed. That's one thing. The rooms are nice. I mean, they keep about 20 people per classroom, and that's adequate. I think they're nice.
Tornadoes were spotted in South Florida Wednesday as Hurricane Milton approached, crossing Interstate 75. The National Weather Service issued tornado watches for 20 counties, covering a large portion of Florida, including the Tampa area, the Florida Keys, and Miami-Dade County. Christina Corona, NTD News.
And the Department of Justice is considering breaking up Google. It's accusing the tech giant of having an illegal monopoly for over a decade.
The Department of Justice has indicated it's considering breaking up Google. In a filing, DOJ says Google's illegal monopoly in search and advertising has resulted in pernicious harms for over a decade. It says Google's practices have made it difficult to compete with.
What's really important in this decision is they're tackling the search business, where Google and Alphabet makes the bulk of their money.
Tech expert Ashley Monraj says this could have a major impact on Google's revenue, possibly forcing Google to license searching technology and let others access search data. Monraj says Google's amalgamation of different services gives advertisers a relatively easy and effective time. In a potential breakup scenario, advertisers could have to use many more third parties.
I'm not sure that if we do get sub-services or smaller services, they would be as widely available and functional as Google Ad Service and different Google services were.
The DOJ is exploring a number of remedies to what it calls Google's monopoly. Google says, quote, DOJ's radical and sweeping proposals risk hurting consumers, businesses, and developers. It says they hurt user privacy, innovation, advertising effectiveness, and Google applications themselves. Google can appeal the verdict of any lawsuit, leading to a lengthy years-long court battle.
During the lame duck session of Congress, lawmakers will have to pass the National Defense Authorization Act, otherwise known as the NDAA, for fiscal year 2025. The House, the Senate, and the Pentagon are at odds over priorities for defense spending. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more.
Congress has yet to approve a defense budget for fiscal year 2025. The House of Representatives is proposing $833 billion, while the Senate is suggesting $911 billion in defense spending. When Congress reconvenes in November, lawmakers will have to pass both the appropriation bill for defense spending in fiscal year 2025 and the National Defense Authorization Act, which is the bill outlining how to spend those close to $900 billion.
For the first time in decades, the bill before us today carries a different short title. It is the Service Member Quality of Life Improvement and National Defense Authorization Act. We did that to underscore the tremendous gains this bill makes toward improving the quality of life for all of our service members and their families.
The House Armed Services Committee version of the NDAA passed with 57 votes in favor and only 1 against. But when this bill got to the House floor, it passed through party lines with 196 Democrats opposing it.
We need to be able to access all the talent in this country, not just white men. Okay, we need to recruit women. We need to recruit from communities of color. We need to recruit from the LGBT community. That is crucial to making sure we have the talent we need.
Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin also opposes the House's version of the National Defense Authorization Act. According to Secretary Austin, if left unaddressed, certain provisions in the House passed or Senate proposed bills will substantially impact the department's ability to accomplish our strategic goals. The Pentagon also opposes the 19% pay increase for junior officers, arguing it cuts into the gap between junior and senior officers, and has requested to build 1, not 2 Virginia-class submarines in fiscal year 2025, something Senate Democrats oppose.
Russia and China are trending in the opposite direction. They're building more, they're developing more and more advanced submarines. The decision to fund the production of just 1 Virginia-class submarine seems highly alarming.
Senate and House Democrats oppose the House's version of the National Defense Authorization Act as it prohibits funding for service members to access abortion and other DEI policies. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
And coming up, with Vice President Kamala Harris now stepping up media appearances, How much do voters know about her policies and achievements? NTD's Sam Wong spoke to the folks out on the National Mall to find out. And a small town paper with a mission for truth. Ann Adams, publisher of the Recorder in Virginia, shares the lasting charm of her 1877 newspaper just after the break. And welcome back to the Capitol Report. From the Howard Stern Show to Stephen Colbert. As the election now enters into its final stretch, Vice President Kamala Harris is stepping up her media appearances. But will time be enough? And screen time aside, how much do voters know about her policies and achievements? NTD's Sam Wong spoke to the folks out in the National Mall to find out.
Would you say you know full well about Harris's policy agenda?
There's not much there other than more of the same and socialism.
I like the idea that she focuses on the middle class.
Like, for example, when she talks about not taxing tips.
She changes horses midstream on a regular basis, so it's hard to say what she's for.
She keeps just going around and around in a circle and not really stating what is really, truly her policy.
She's talking about building homes, what kind of numbers she has been thinking of, and initiatives and policies that will help support that.
There's a lot of word salads when you try to find out what those policies are.
Throughout Harris's political career, what are some of her biggest political achievements or accomplishments?
I can't name one.
I have a blank look on my face, don't I?
She is a decent person, and she's a former senator and former prosecutor.
Giving away money? No, I can't.
Following up on some of the criminal activities and actually doing the prosecutions rather than letting things ride.
To me, it's her legacy. She come from a single family. She become the Secretary of State. She become Vice President.
I think that the way she has really focused on women's health and getting in there and getting policy initiated.
I don't think she has accomplished what is beneficial to us as a nation and for what is right in the sight of every American, Democratic and Republican.
A small-town newspaper in the state of Virginia marking its 147 years of print. Let's hear from Ann Adams, the publisher of the Recorder newspaper, about her journey into journalism and keeping the community paper alive. Ann Adams, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
And the Recorder, your newspaper, has been in print since 1877. Tell us about your personal journey with this paper and what actually motivates you to keep on going?
I started this paper almost 35 years ago. And when the previous publisher was ready to sell, I worked hard to try to buy it because I enjoyed it so much. I had worked in pretty much every job at the paper, from selling ads to running the press. And I just fell in love with the idea of journalism.
Talk to us about, this polarizing time where so many people don't know who to trust and where to get their information in a time of really objective truth. What is sort of your driving philosophy?
Social media has a lot to do with the polarization, as do the politics of this time. But our mission is to always get at the truth, and we work really hard to earn our readers' trust. And they know us very well. They know how to find us. It's a small area, so that's easier to do. It's much harder to hide behind difficult rhetoric when you're in a small town like this, in a very intimate environment.
I mean, we see massive layoffs and cuts at some of these big news agencies, whether it's print or television. Nearly a quarter of newspapers have gone out of print since 2005. We know firsthand, our sister media, the Epoch Times, also has a print edition, how challenging it is. How have you managed to not only sustain, but never miss an issue? And has funding and staffing been a challenge for you?
Yes, it's all very much a challenge. And we sort of fly by the seat of our pants every week to week. We go in and out of debt. Every time the post office hikes up the price of mailing, it is a huge concern. The cost of everything has gone up, and newspapers really suffer that. But our readers really like the printed version, and many of them don't have access to the internet. So becoming an online-only version of this newspaper just won't serve my community well at all.
Talk to us about what's special about, your community newspaper, and sort of how do you guys determine what is top news to your readers?
It's not hard. If there's something that everybody's talking about, that's the top news. This week it was a big train derailment in one of our little cities, and when you're out and about in the community as much as we are, we have a good sense of what folks are talking about, what's important to them, what they care about, what's on their minds, because we're out there talking to them every day.
Now, there's probably few people in your community that have their finger on the pulse of that, community, if you will, than you and your team. So tell us, is there a story that you've covered in your community that has truly and deeply inspired you?
Oh, quite a few. The people who live here are very inspiring. They live here because they choose to. It's not an easy place to live. We are geographically isolated. We have a Canadian climate, and some of the lowest median incomes in the state of Virginia. This is a community of volunteers. If someone is in trouble, they pitch in, lend a hand, raise money, help them get a new kidney, whatever it takes. They really here for each other. It's a close-knit community.
Ann Adams, publisher of The Recorder, community newspaper in Virginia. Really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you, Steve.
That is all we have for you this evening on the Capitol Report. For round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live and download our NTD mobile app. From Washington, D.C., I'm Steve Lance. Have a nice evening. See you back here tomorrow.